Hey there, Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the movement for movement and bringing you another edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training, where I take a concept, a strategy, something that we utilize in autism fitness programming for our autism and neurodivergent populations, our life skill athletes, and consolidate it a little bit, explain it a little bit, and demonstrate how you can use it in your own fitness and adapted PE programs, wherever you are in any type of environment. If you are in a home, school, classroom, clinic, gym, etc., as long as it is a safe and appropriate environment. And in this Autism Fitness Tuesday training, I am going to be talking about age-appropriate exercise, what that means, some of the connotations, some of the misconceptions, mythologies. I don't know if there's a mythological creature associated with it, whether it be a griffin or maybe a lizard-like creature that has multiples of arms, maybe some claws, a forked tongue, all the things that mythical reptiles and or amphibians usually have. Anyway, before I get started, please definitely subscribe, and share this video with someone for whom it might make a difference. So when we talk about age-appropriate exercise for the autism and neurodivergent population, the first thing that we have to look at is the general or neurotypical population and how fitness or physical education usually looks. And typically, or historically, at least back to maybe like the 1980s when I was born, but it seems like a really long time ago, but not really. And then there was the neon era. We had neon shoelaces. It was really cool, but that was more the early 90s. I digress. When we look at PE programs in general, most of the PE programs for younger kids, elementary, maybe even into middle school, were more gamified. The term fun gets thrown around. Of course, fun is going to be dependent on if someone actually wants to participate and if they can participate fully and meaningfully. And then going into more competitive sports-based into middle and high school. That's kind of the general PE trajectory, although it has changed a little bit more to supply a wider variety of individualized programming, whether it's strength or yoga or some type of other athletic pursuit. So here and there, we're seeing this trend start to dissipate a little bit, and I think for good reasons also, because not everybody is going to play competitive sports, and I'll get into that in a couple minutes. So when we look at this from a developmental standpoint, games and fun activities are great, and if we can get younger children to participate, again, meaningfully to the best of their ability and they're engaged, again, great. The issue here is then when we're talking about the autism and neurodivergent population, if we attempt to gamify everything early on, we also have to take into account the PAC profile, physical, adaptive, and cognitive, of each participant. What do I mean by that? So if we have a class of 5 or 6 or 7 neurodivergent students, and we say, oh, we're going to do this really fun game where the objective is this and this and this, or there's an offensive, there's a defensive component if it's competitive, or even if not, if there are multi-steps to completing whatever the activity is, we have to make certain that it is scalable for each individual from each 3 of those perspectives. Of course, the PAC profile is the standard operating system in autism fitness, so it stands to reason that we would need to scale each level or individualize slightly each level of that activity for that individual. Physically, are they strong and stable and capable enough to complete whatever activity A is? Are they motivated and engaged enough to participate in activity A? And then, do they understand and can they communicate, and what is their coachability like? That's the cognitive. How do they receive and how do they respond to instruction with activity A? All right. Now, the issue there is also one of developmental stages and what is age appropriate versus what is individual appropriate also. The reason that in autism fitness programming we focus, I say predominantly, but almost exclusively on strength-based training, meaning resistance training, and some fundamental conditioning movements, carries, sled pushes and drags, that kind of things, our farmer's walks, our chest carries, is because those are going to be the fundamentals of having a good movement base. The nice thing about this also is it doesn't really change that much whether we're talking about younger populations, adolescents, teenagers, and adults. And along the way, if we want to gamify it, if we want to throw in some fun activities or even some competitive or quasi-competitive activities to make it more motivating, if that is the case, we can add that in as well. The reality is, as far as physiology, teaching a squat pattern and a healthy squat pattern is as essential with one of our 5-year-old students or athletes as it is with a 50-year-old student or athlete. And I have professional anecdotes about that as well. So even though the developmental stages will of course change, so with younger students or younger kids, we may be focusing a little bit more on motor planning. So we may be doing some more low to the ground, cone touch activities, a little more carrying activities, a little more locomotive, level change, up, down, backwards, forwards, left, right, because that is the prime opportunity to develop a lot of those motor skills. Some balance also. Again, there's a threshold for balance training as well. This is why we don't do any standing on a stability ball type training with our adolescent and teen and adult athletes, because number one, it's far less effective than stable ground, and number two, especially because it's far less stable, that window of development as far as balance training has really closed. Once we get to a certain age, somewhere around 7 or 8 on average, right? And that's with the general population, but we can definitely take that information and generalize that to the neurodivergent and autism populations as well. So now the point that I mentioned earlier about a squat pattern or a pressing pattern or pushing or pulling or any of these fundamental movement patterns that we want to teach for our life skill athletes. If I know, and this is the ideal world, the utopia of movement and physical fitness, if I have an athlete who comes into my center who's now 25 and they have had a history of good physical activity and good adapted PE programming and access to good fitness training via Autism Fitness Certified Pros, then I can be more confident. I have to assess, but I can be more confident that they are going to have these fundamental movement patterns established at 25 years old, which they should. Yes, I said should. I will say it again. Should be able to do that. Typically for me, in that situation, I have a 25-year-old who has never had any type of comprehensive or individualized fitness programming, so we're starting at a very remedial or rudimentary level of squatting where we do have to incorporate a lot of modification. In autism fitness programming, we use a box or a platform. Maybe we use the band for that upper body stability, as well as the athlete acclimates to that squatting pattern and starts to develop more strength and stability around it. But what if that athlete from a very young age had the squat and the push and the pull and the carry and the press and all of these fundamental movement patterns in their day-to-day programming? Well, that's a very different 25-year-old that I get as a coach 20 years later. So if we think about it from the reference point of what do we want to happen over the long term, then the question, would become, it's a rhetorical one, why would we not incorporate the foundational movement patterns early on rather than waiting, or worst case scenario, which is the most often case scenario, not incorporating them for our autism and neurodivergent population at all until, mid-adulthood, beyond, or again, not even consider it and just wait until they age, and then we have all of the medical contraindications that occur along the way. So from an age-appropriate standpoint, most of, if not all of the foundational exercises, our squats, our pushes, our pulls, our carries, our hinges, are going to be applicable in some way, shape, or form for younger populations. With younger populations, when we're talking about 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-ish, we may want to introduce more motor planning activities as well, or sequencing, but these are not a very far cry or too many steps away, no pun intended, pun kind of intended, from what we would be doing with any of our adolescent or teen or adult athletes as well, because we want to develop those baseline skills so that they can continue to progress. So again, by the time we have an adolescent, they are familiar with the squat pattern. They know how to overhead press. They can do 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 great push-ups in a set, right? There's no reason to wait. There's no physiological reason to wait until that individual is well into their teens. And the research has been done and is plentiful on this as well. And if we think about it from a sport-specific perspective, and this is where, especially in our own kind of American culture, our way of doing things, it gets completely backwards. Oftentimes, we're starting kids off with sports really early, but completely ignoring the foundational movement stuff. And a lot of those have been referred to as like playground skills. You're running around, jumping, you're squatting, you're moving in a variety of different ways. And nobody raises an eyebrow at specialization for a sport. So of course you're gonna, if you're playing soccer or football for our European and, well, not just European, South America, everywhere in the world except here. If you're looking at soccer, it's the same repetitive skills over and over and over, and nobody bats an eye at it. Of course you're going to kick the ball. Of course you're going to work on offense, defense, running laterally, forward, backwards, etc. I will preface, not preface because I already said it, but I'll follow up on that saying I know nothing about soccer. But to that point, it doesn't seem strange to start young children off with the basic skills in sports-specific activities, but there is an odd stigma about general movement preparation and general fitness training, as though this is something that should just be held off on or relegated to older ages. But if we think about the course of an individual's lifetime, as they get into those adult years and as they get into even geriatric years, those are going to be the movement patterns. Those are going to be the physical skills that are going to promote safety and independence and the maintenance and development of lean muscle tissue and stave off against bone degeneration. These are the most important things. So why wouldn't we not incorporate these early? So from a developmental standpoint, it would make sense to introduce the fundamental movement patterns early and often. And the programming will progress at the current ability or the baseline of that particular individual. That's where we individualize it. So we don't just take blocks and say, okay, this is the kids program, this is the adolescent program, this is the teen program. We do it on a needs basis for each group or each individual, right? And the fundamental basis of this is in those basic movement patterns. If we want to gamify it, if we want to add in some type of competitive or quasi-competitive activities, we can do that, but we don't want to do that to the detriment of developing these foundational skills, because those are going to be the most important ones to generalize to activities of daily living. So I hope that was helpful for you. We didn't get too much into the adaptive and cognitive of that. Of course, that's going to vary individual to individual. So depending on the diagnosis, oftentimes we can have a 12-year-old athlete who has a high level of motivation and coachability versus a 21-year-old who needs a lot more support. So the age is not going to be most often the differentiating factor in the way that we incorporate programming and the way that we introduce and continue to run programming. But we're also going to look at it from the developmental stage, what that athlete needs and what that athlete is presenting as far as their current capabilities. So I hope this has been helpful, maybe even eye-opening for you. I'd love to know what you think. Leave your thoughts, questions in the comments below. If there's something that you'd like me to cover in a future edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training, leave that in the comments below as also. Of course, it helps share the video algorithmically. And if you're ready to become an Autism Fitness Certified Pro, then you can jump on over to autismfitness.com, learn all about the course, register, and begin your coaching journey today, or tonight, or tomorrow morning. Thanks for watching.